The day my sister cut my name off the blueprint, I realized this wasn't about design. It was about erasure. The blueprint stretched across my drafting table, its corners frayed from months of my restless hands smoothing it flat. Coffee stains ghosted the edges. Pencil marks layered like sediment, each one a reminder of sleepless nights of calculating weight loads and stare angles until my head throbbed. I had poured myself into it. Every line mattered, the way the atrium was cut to welcome dawn, the arc of the stairwell designed to echo a childhood banister. Even the tree placement to let wind move like a song through the courtyard. It was more than architecture. It was memory translated into geometry. And in the bottom right corner, the quiet square of identity, my initials E. Whitmore anchored it. Proof that I existed here. That this building would remember me. But when I unrolled the revision packet, that square was gone. In its place, V. Whitmore. Vanessa. My sister's name, neat, permanent, confident. She had replaced me as easily as erasing a stray line. At first, I blinked, thinking fatigue blurred the page. Maybe I'd pulled the wrong draft. Maybe the printers had mislabeled files. But when my fingertips brushed the ink sharp and unyielding, I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Architects understand better than most credit is survival. Your name on the blueprint is the bridge between the invisible labor and the legacy that stands for decades. Without it, you become a ghost watching someone else take the bow. That night, I drove to the family home with the blueprint rolled under my arm like contraband. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and garlic, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Vanessa sat at the island, scrolling her phone, sipping red wine. She didn't look up until I flattened the blueprint on the counter. Why, my voice cracked thinner than I wanted. She studied me for a beat, then offered a smile-polished camera ready. It looks cleaner this way. One name. Unified. Unified? That was her word for theft. This was mine, I whispered. And now it's ours, she replied. Not a hint of apology, just certainty. That word ours hit harder than the deletion itself. In my family, ours meant nothing belonged to you alone. Your work was communal until someone more glamorous claimed it. Then it was theirs entirely. I left shaking blueprint clutched like evidence in a trial only I seemed to know existed. Back in my apartment, the anger hardened into resolve. I copied everything drafts with timestamps, saved emails where I explained structural fixes, photos of sticky notes scribbled at 2 a.m. I built an archive, my own fortress of receipts. If they wanted to erase me, they would have to battle paper metadata and time itself. Weeks blurred. The project advanced. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Vanessa posed in a hard hat, shovel in hand, smiling for the cameras. Reporters jotted down her vision. Brochures bore her name alone. Investors toasted to her brilliance. I stood at the back folder pressed against my chest, invisible among the crowd. My silence felt heavier than applause. They believed the erasure was complete, that one altered signature had rewritten the truth. But truth has patience. It lingers in drafts and files in the quiet memory of the hands that actually drew the lines. Buildings rise slowly, brick by brick. So does justice. And when the structure finally stands, when the plaque is carved in steel, the question won't be who smiled for the cameras. It will be who built the bones. That answer will always be me. I am Ella Whitmore, and I was the blueprint. Has your family ever stolen your work? 1, yes, 0, no. The Whitmore dinner table was never just a place to eat. It was a stage polished oak, gleaming under chandelier light set for performances rather than nourishment. Tonight was no different. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every sentence sharpened like a press release. The air smelled faintly of truffle oil and old wine, the kind of luxury that made silence seem expensive. Richard, my father, presided at the head as though he were hosting dignitaries instead of family. He raised his glass, the ruby liquid catching the light, and delivered his verdict like a headline: Vivian has brought glory to this family name. His voice carried the weight of ceremony as if he were reading from stone tablets, not praising a daughter who had taken what wasn't hers. Across from him, my mother Clara smiled her delicate diplomatic smile. It was the same smile she used when smoothing over gossip at galas or pretending not to notice the cracks in her own marriage. "Ella, darling, you should be happy for your sister," She cooed her words, floating across the table like a perfumed veil. It sounded less like advice and more like an order. Stay silent, stay agreeable, let the story stand. Henry, my brother-in-law, leaned back in his chair with practiced ease, fork tapping the rim of his plate. He smirked, tossing out his line with the carelessness of someone convinced history would always be on his side. It's just a signature. He said it lightly like a joke, as though my erased name were nothing more than a smudge on the page, not the deliberate theft of years of work. The others nodded, clinking glasses, laughter echoing against marble walls. For them, the performance was complete. Vivian, the golden child, applauded and elevated. Ella, the quiet shadow, gently scolded into compliance. The narrative was sealed over roasted lamb and crystal stemware. I didn't speak. My tongue pressed hard against my teeth, holding back the torrent of words I wanted to release. Outwardly, I gave them nothing. Just silence, just the picture of restraint they had always expected from me. But under the table, hidden beneath the linen, my hand moved with precision. My phone screen dimmed, sat ready in my lap. With the quietest touch of my thumb, I pressed the red circle. Recording. The memo app glowed faintly, a secret witness to the theater around me. Every word my father intoned, every soft dismissal from my mother, every careless shrug from Henry, it was all captured, time-stamped, undeniable. Proof that while they staged their press conference of lies, I had not vanished. The conversation flowed on. Vivian basked in their praise, her laughter sweet, and practiced her fingers tracing the rim of her glass like she was tuning the room. My father recounted her triumphs to anyone who would listen. My mother dabbed at invisible crumbs with her napkin, and Henry poured more wine, certain the evening belonged to them. But beneath the table in that pocket of silence, only I occupied another story was being written. A story with evidence. They thought this performance would end with applause and desert their version of the truth swallowed whole. What they didn't know was that every line of their script was already preserved, stored safely in my device. For years, they had treated my work, my name, as negotiable, erasable ink in the family narrative. Tonight, they reminded me once again, to them, glory was selective, truth was malleable, and silence was expected. But I wasn't silent. Not really. My voice was pressed into the record button, my defiance hidden in the glow of a memo app. When the plates were cleared and the evening ended, they left the table satisfied, convinced their version of history would stand. They never saw the phone slip back into my pocket screen, dark again, but memory intact. The Whitmore dinner had been a performance. Yes. But for the first time, I wasn't just an unwilling audience. I was the archivist. And someday soon, when their words come back to confront them, they will realize what they handed me. At that table was not just humiliation. It was evidence. The notification lit up my phone just as I was rinsing the last of the coffee from my mug. A soft vibration, harmless at first glance, but when I tapped the screen, my pulse spiked. Vivian had posted again. Her Instagram story filled the glass, the familiar Whitmore glow, curated lighting, expensive manicure, the caption written in the confident script of someone who believes the world belongs to her. The image was sharp, the blueprint. My blueprint. Except my name wasn't there. In the corner where the credit box should have read E. Whitmore only V, Whitmore gleamed. Clean, bold, final. The caption blazed beneath, Body, Whitmore Legacy. Visionary design. Future unfolds. Comments flooded in as I watched each one a nail tightening the coffin of my existence. Genius, incredible work. Vivian, you're unstoppable. Heart emojis, applause, hands, golden crowns. The digital chorus was relentless, swallowing the truth whole in the space of seconds. I sat frozen, phone trembling in my hand. It wasn't just the theft of a name, it was the speed of the lie, the way her version spread like wildfire, while mine burned out in silence. The room around me dimmed, my apartment shrinking until all that existed was the glow of the screen and the thrum in my chest. I opened my notes app, fingers stiff but steady. Note nar1, IG post, 7:43 p.m. credit removed. I saved the link-captured screenshots, even recorded the screen scrolling through comments as proof. Receipts cold and digital. If Vivian wanted the performance of a lifetime, I would be the one running the camera in the back row. The irony wasn't lost on me. Architects design permanence concrete steel glass meant to outlast centuries. But in this new arena, permanence was measured in seconds, in likes, in how quickly a lie could become truth when thousands of strangers tapped twice. I scrolled again, the sting sharper each time. There was the atrium I had sketched while fighting sleep, the stairwell curve I'd modeled after a childhood banister, the courtyard trees I'd plotted like stars on a map. All of it stamped with her name. None of it mine. Vivian's face appeared in the next story, her voice floating above orchestral music. When you work hard enough, your vision speaks for itself. She smiled into the camera, that easy Whitmore smile polished enough to sell the erasure as inspiration. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I pressed record screen again. My breathing slowed, deliberate, controlled. This wasn't rage. This was evidence. By the time the 24-hour cycle erased her story, I would still have it time-stamped undeniable. And maybe the world wouldn't care. Maybe they'd keep applauding convinced brilliance wore Vivian's face. But the record would exist. The truth would outlast the performance. I leaned back against the couch, eyes locked on the dimming phone. The comments kept multiplying, family legacy at its best. She was born for this. Born for this. I almost laughed. Vivian hadn't been born for anything except pretending, and yet here she was claiming my sleepless nights as destiny. My notes app blinked open again. Note Narau. Public reception, hundreds of comments. All attribute vision to V. Whitmore. Evidence was accumulating, one line at a time. If they wanted to play legacy on Instagram, I would build mine in archives, in receipts, in files no one could crop. The screen went dark in my hand, reflecting my face faintly layered over her stolen work. For a moment, it was like staring into the future, her image projected, mine erased. But I knew better than to trust projections. Buildings weren't built from hashtags. They were built from foundations. And my foundation was proof. The performance might be hers, but the blueprint was mine. And when the applause dies down, when the hashtags fade, the receipts will remain. I closed my eyes, replaying her story one last time in my mind. The caption, the comments, the way erasure looked so beautiful when filtered through gold light. Then I whispered to the empty room. Noted. The subject line appeared in my inbox like a flare in the dark, for your eyes only. It was from Nora. The name alone stopped me. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she walked out of the firm with her box of files and her head held higher than management deserved. Back then, she'd whispered a simple warning in the stairwell on her last day. Be careful, Ella. They don't just take credit, they take names. I thought she meant it as a metaphor, a bitter goodbye from someone burned by office politics. I hadn't realized she meant it literally. Now her email glowed on my screen, heavy with the weight of a secret. I hesitated before clicking. My apartment was silent except for the low hum of the radiator, the city outside muffled by snow piling on windowsills. I knew opening the message might change everything, but curiosity pressed harder than fear. I tapped. The body of the email was bare. For your eyes only. Keep it safe. No greeting, no explanation. Just those 2 sentences and an attachment. My throat tightened as I downloaded the file. A metadata report, one of those dry, hidden layers of information most people never think to check. Architects live in blueprints, not file properties. But data tells its own story. I opened it, and the screen filled with lines of code-like detail creation, date version history edits, author tags. My eyes skimmed the page until they landed on the line that mattered most. Author Ella Whitmore. I stopped breathing for a moment. There it was. Not a whisper of memory, not my word against theirs. My name embedded into the skeleton of the project. A digital fingerprint no eraser could touch. I read it again, slower this time. Author Ella Whitmore. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of silence family dinners where my father toasted Vivian as the visionary Instagram stories, where she posed with my atrium curves and staircase arcs like they were hers. Each performance buried me deeper in invisibility. And now in this file, I had oxygen again. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. That my name hadn't simply vanished into smoke. It had been there all along, encoded in the DNA of the design. I whispered the words like a prayer receipts. because that's what this was. Receipts number 1, the first stone in what I knew would become a fortress. My hands moved quickly, almost frantic. I saved the file 3 different ways on my hard drive in a password-protected cloud, and on the small silver USB I kept taped beneath my desk drawer like contraband. I printed a copy too, watching the paper slide out of the machine, my name crisp in black and white. Tangible. Unarguable. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I screenshotted every line of the report. I recorded a video of myself scrolling through it, narrating the time and date. If anyone tried to claim I faked it later, I'd have more than one layer of evidence. As I worked, Nora's words echoed. Keep it safe. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the laptop. Nora had risked something by sending me this. She must have dug into archives she wasn't supposed to access, or maybe she'd saved a copy on her way out of the firm, anticipating that one day I'd need it. Either way, it wasn't just kindness. It was courage. I thought back to our nights in the office when everyone else had gone home, and it was just the 2 of us under fluorescent lights. She'd watch me sketch revisions until my wrists cramped, then quietly slide a granola bar across the desk. Fuel for the forgotten she'd joke. She always noticed. Now she was noticing again from the outside, but still watching. Still protecting. The irony struck me. Vivian had the spotlight, the glossy captions, the applause echoing across the internet. And I was here in the dim of my apartment, clutching metadata like scripture. But applause fades. Metadata doesn't. Vivian's empire was built on filters and champagne toasts. Mine was building quietly in files and receipts no one could crop. I closed my laptop slowly, the click loud in the quiet room. For the first time since my name was sliced off that blueprint, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. I had evidence, and evidence outlasts applause. Receipts number 1, the first, but not the last. Because once you begin archiving, once you realize silence itself can be weaponized, you never stop. You collect, you prepare, you wait. And one day when the curtain falls on all their performances, the record will remain cold, undeniable, carrying my name, Ella Whitmore. The book landed on the table with a celebratory thud. Its cover gleamed in embossed gold, The Whitmore Family Chronicle. My mother Clara had it printed for the reunion, a glossy artifact meant to showcase our legacy. She said the word with pride, as though the story of our family had been carefully tended like a garden instead of cropped and pruned until only one bloom remained. I picked it up, its weight heavier than it looked, the smell of new ink still clinging to the pages. Clara hovered, smiling, that delicate diplomatic smile of hers. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked, not really waiting for an answer. Around us, aunts and cousins leaned in, eager to flip through the curated history. The first page opened with a sweeping photograph of Vivian at a groundbreaking ceremony. She stood at the center, hard hat, tilted just right, the curve of my staircase design rising in the background. Her smile was confident, glossy, framed perfectly for the printers. Beneath it, Vivian Whitmore, architect of the future. I turned the page. Again, Vivian at the center. Surrounded by clapping hands, champagne flutes, and borrowed words that I had once spoken late at night over takeout containers. My face was there, faint in the corner, half hidden by a bouquet. The next spread another shot of Vivian. She posed with our father Richard, his arm slung across her shoulders like she was the heir apparent. The caption read, "Carrying the torch of the Whitmore name." I recognized the setting. It had been the same dinner where I sat silent, recording their words under the table. But here I wasn't at the table at all. In the photo, the crop line ended just before me. My chest tightened as I flipped further. Page after page, Vivian's face filled the frames. Gala photos, charity events, office milestones, all anchored by her like she was gravity itself. And me, I was background blur. The cousin's elbow that happened to show. A shadow in a window. Or worse, simply absent, erased by cropping scissors and design software. Clara's voice floated from across the room. "We wanted it clean. Just the highlights. Clean. Highlights. Euphemisms for disappearance." I pressed my thumb against the corner of a page, resisting the urge to rip it out. My reflection caught in the glossy paper, faint and distorted, as though mocking the fact that I existed more in the glare of the ink than in the family's official record. I closed the book halfway, the sound louder than I meant. My notes app blinked open on my phone under the table. Note Nare, print erasure, Family Chronicle Edition 1, Evidence of Cropping. I snapped a photo of the page for good measure, the flash bouncing off the gold lettering. The laughter around me swelled as relatives marveled at Vivian's accomplishments, fingers tracing her images as if they were relics. My mother looked on, serene, soaking in the admiration. My father raised another toast, his voice booming about legacy. But I sat there with the Chronicle in my lap, its pages heavy with lies. Because this wasn't just a family scrapbook, it was a weapon. The kind of artifact that rewrites memory that future cousins and grandchildren would point to as fact. And in those curated frames, I had already been erased. I shut the book firmly, my breath shallow. They thought print was final, that ink on paper sealed the story forever. But I knew better. Even a glossy family chronicle could be marked noted, cataloged. Every crop was another receipt. Every missing face, another entry in the archive I was building. The chronicle was their performance. My notes were the counterscript. I slipped the book back onto the table, smiling faintly so no one would look too closely at the storm running under my skin. They were busy applauding the image, not the truth, but I had seen enough. Receipts don't need to be center stage. They just need to survive. The contract slid across the polished oak table like a blade. Its edges were crisp, its cover embossed the pages inside, heavy with the weight of prepared lies. Henry placed it in front of me with a smile that looked harmless, but his eyes gleamed with calculation. Just a formality, he said, tapping the corner with his manicured finger. Family first. Those two words, family first, were the Whitmore anthem used whenever they wanted to smother me into compliance. They were not a promise of belonging. They were a command. I stared at the contract without touching it. The title page read Joint Ownership Agreement, but I didn't need a lawyer to know what it really meant. It was another act of erasure cloaked in the language of togetherness. Sign here, and everything you built will belong to us. Sign here, and your name becomes decoration instead of authorship. Sign here, and the record of your work vanishes under a banner of unity. The room felt colder, though the fire burned steadily in the hearth. My mother sat at the far end, her polite smile fixed like porcelain. Clara always smiled in moments like this, as if gentleness could mask the sharpness of what was happening. My father Richard loomed at the head of the table, hands folded, waiting for me to yield. Vivian sat next to him, posture perfect, already basking in the glow of victory. To them, my signature wasn't just ink, it was surrender. I looked at Henry. If it's a formality, I said, voice steady, then you don't need my signature. The air shifted instantly, the silence heavier than any outburst. My refusal wasn't loud, but it was seismic. Henry's smile faltered. He glanced toward Richard, who reached for his wine glass with deliberate calm. He tapped the rim with his ring, the sound sharp as a gavel striking wood. Ungrateful, he said. Just one word, but it cracked through the room like thunder. I felt it in my chest, the weight of decades behind that accusation. In this family, gratitude was obedience. Gratitude meant signing papers without reading them. Gratitude meant letting Vivian's name sit on work that wasn't hers. Gratitude meant silence. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Beneath the table, my phone was recording voice memo glowing red. Every word, every accusation, every carefully crafted manipulation preserved. Receipts. I met my father's gaze. His eyes were cold, daring me to answer. I didn't. Silence was my shield. Silence and the growing archive of evidence I carried with me. Vivian broke the pause with a soft laugh, tilting her head as if I were being childish. Ella, why make things difficult? This is for all of us. You should be proud. Pride. Another mask. What they wanted wasn't pride. It was compliance dressed as loyalty. I pushed the contract back across the table, my fingers brushing the paper only long enough to make the rejection clear. The sound of it sliding away was louder than any speech I could have given. For a moment, no one moved. The fire crackled. Glasses clinked faintly as condensation slipped down their stems. Then Richard set his wine down with a heavy thud. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low final. Maybe I would. Maybe refusing meant exile silence at reunions being edited out of the next Whitmore Chronicle. But I also knew regret looked different when you signed away your own name. I stood slowly gathering my coat from the back of the chair. The contract still lay on the table untouched, like bait no longer tempting. My mother's smile tightened. Henry sighed, muttering something about family unity. Vivian looked at me with disdain, certain that history would side with her. But I knew better. History isn't written in toasts or captions. It's written in receipts. As I walked out of the room, I slipped my phone into my pocket, the recording saved and labeled. Another file in the archive. Another brick in the wall I was building piece by piece. The Whitmores thought they had set a trap. But all they had really done was give me more proof. Receipts don't lie. And someday when the truth finally surfaces, that untouched contract will be remembered not as my surrender, but as the moment I chose not to disappear. The gala hummed with chatter and clinking glasses, the kind of background noise that makes betrayal sound almost civilized. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, their crystals scattering light across sequined dresses and polished shoes. Vivian had been the star of the evening, gliding from conversation to conversation, smiling like she owned every camera in the room. I should have expected it when she tugged at my elbow. Her grip was light but firm, her smile still plastered on for the crowd. She led me away from the laughter past the curtains and down a narrow hall where the hum of voices faded into silence. Only the muffled bass of music remained vibrating faintly through the walls. She turned, then dropping the mask the way actors do when the curtain falls. Her smile flattened into something harder, colder. "Legacy needs a face," she said. Her voice was calm, practiced as if she'd rehearsed the line 100 times. "And it isn't you." The words landed like stones in my chest. Not shouted, not cruel in volume, just deliberate. Surgical. I didn't answer. My throat burned, but I kept my face still, the silence a shield. My hand slipped into my pocket. The smooth glass of my phone warmed beneath my fingers. With one quiet swipe, the camera opened. I lifted it, just enough thumb pressing the red circle. Recording. The lens captured her in that dim corridor, hair perfectly styled makeup, flawless, her expression sharpened by certainty. Every syllable that followed became evidence. "You don't understand," she continued, stepping closer, her perfume thick with expensive roses. "This family doesn't survive on effort. It survives on image. You build, I present. That's how it works. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word again. Always the demand beneath every toast, every smile, every family first. Gratitude as obedience. Gratitude as silence. I kept the phone steady, my lips pressed together, unbroken by reply. Silence can be louder than shouting if you hold it long enough. Vivian mistook it for weakness. She tilted her head, almost pitying. "You've always been better in the background. Quiet. Careful. The world doesn't remember careful. It remembers faces. And mine fits the story." I wanted to laugh or scream or tear the chandeliers down until the whole room saw what I saw. Instead, I focused on the screen in my palm. Every frame, every word locked away. Receipts don't require confrontation. They require patience. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She glanced down, already dismissing me. "Smile for the family photos later," she murmured. "Or don't. You won't be in them anyway." With that, she slipped back through the curtain, her laugh brightening again as she rejoined the gala. Applause greeted her return. The performance never cracked. I stayed in the shadows of the corridor, my chest tight, my phone glowing in my hand. On the screen, the recording bar ticked steadily forward. I stopped it, saved it, and labeled it. Receipts Thermotry. For a long moment, I leaned against the wall, letting the noise of the party seep back into my ears. They were still clapping, still smiling, still convinced the Whitmore legacy was flawless marble. But I had the Fishers' preserved files, notes, photos, now video. Proof that beneath the polished stone was rot. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the lights. No one noticed my return. No one ever did. But someday when the curtains fall and the cameras turn off, when the applause fades into memory, they will notice. Because I will have the record. Legacy isn't carved in faces. It's carved in evidence. And evidence survives. The Whitmore dining room had never felt heavier. The chandelier above hummed faintly, its crystals catching the light, throwing fractured patterns onto the oak table that had borne more verdicts than meals. Tonight the air was thick with expectation, every fork polished like a weapon, every wine glass a prop. My father Richard presided at the head as always, Vivian glowing beside him. The script was set, another evening of praise for her silence for me, but I had rewritten the script. The door creaked open just as the first toast began. Heads turned, voices softened, and into the room stepped a tall man in a charcoal suit. Silver hair, neat glasses balanced low on his nose. He carried no fanfare, no announcement, only a leather folder tucked under one arm. Mr. Grayson, the estate lawyer I had contacted quietly without anyone's knowledge. He didn't bow or offer greetings. He simply moved to an empty chair at the far end of the table and sat. Calm, silent. His presence alone unsettled the rhythm of the room. He opened his folder, the snap of its clasp cutting through the air sharper than any insult. Slowly, deliberately, he began to flip through documents, each page turning like the tick of a clock. Richard stiffened his hand, pausing midway to lift his glass. His eyes narrowed, voice low but edged. Why is he here? All eyes turned to me. For a moment, the weight of the family pressed down like a spotlight. My mother's smile faltered. Henry leaned forward, frowning. Vivian rolled her eyes, annoyed at the disruption of her stage. I met my father's gaze and let a small smile rise, not defiance, not apology. Just calm. To make sure history is written correctly. The silence that followed was thicker than velvet. Mr. Grayson did not speak. He didn't need to. His role was not to argue or defend. His role was to witness, to bring weight to words that my family had long dismissed as unworthy. Every turn of a page was confirmation, the deeds, the trust documents, the records of ownership. Each paper he laid out on the table carried my name proof stitched in ink and law. Vivian's face tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her perfect composure. She glanced at Richard as if waiting for him to reclaim control. But for once, his booming certainty faltered. He sipped his wine too quickly, the crystal clinking against his teeth. Across from me, my mother whispered Ella. Not in comfort, but in warning. As though truth itself were impolite. I didn't look away. I kept my eyes on the folder, on the steady rhythm of Mr. Grayson's hands. Each document he touched was a receipt, another stitch in the net I had been weaving quietly behind their backs. For years, they had called me ungrateful, difficult, invisible. They had cropped me out of photos, stripped my name from blueprints, tried to corner me with contracts. But tonight I had something stronger than silence. I had the law sitting at my table, breathing in the same air, refusing to be ignored. Richard finally set his glass down with a heavy thud. This isn't necessary, he muttered. I tilted my head. Then it shouldn't bother you. He clenched his jaw but said nothing more. Mr. Grayson closed the folder at last, aligning the edges perfectly before resting his hand on top. Still silent, still steady, as if daring anyone to challenge the weight of what he carried. He hadn't spoken a word yet. The balance of power in the room had shifted. Vivian forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. This is ridiculous. We're family. We don't need outsiders. But she stopped when Mr. Grayson's gaze lifted, quiet but piercing, as though he could see through every performance she had ever staged. The room went still again. The fire crackled, the chandelier hummed, but no one dared to speak. I folded my hands on the table, the faintest smile still on my lips. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to defend myself. The record was defending me. History was being written not by their toasts, not by their captions, but by the documents resting in that folder. Documents no one could crop, edit, or erase. And with Mr. Grayson sitting silently at the Whitmore table, every member of my family understood the same truth: the story had changed. The ballroom lights dimmed until the stage glowed like the center of the universe. Rows of polished chairs stretched across the room filled with investors, city officials and reporters leaning forward with their pens poised. Cameras hovered at the back like vultures ready to immortalize whatever image they were fed. The air buzzed with the scent of champagne and ambition. And then Vivian appeared. She stepped onto the stage in a flowing white dress that shimmered under the spotlights. To the audience, she looked like a star, luminous, untouchable. The crowd hushed as though awaiting prophecy. She smiled perfectly rehearsed and rested her manicured hands on the podium. The giant screens flanking her came alive with the first slide. It was the blueprint. My blueprint. Only the corner told a different story, Vivian Whitmore. The applause came instantly thunderous and uncritical. The room swelled with admiration, people clapping for a vision they believed was hers. Phones lifted to capture the moment hashtags already forming in strangers' minds. Whitmore Legacy. Visionary Design. Architect of the Future. Behind the curtain, I stood with my laptop clutched tight, its surface warm against my palms. My heart pounded not from nerves, but from the weight of choice. I could walk away as I had so many times before, let the performance play out while history rewrote itself around me. Or I could press the key that would finally irreversibly change the story. I watched Vivian's lips move, her voice rising and falling like music. This project represents the future of our family, our city, our legacy. The crowd nodded enthralled. They wanted to believe in her glow in the Whitmore perfection stage before them. But legacies aren't built on glow. They're built on foundations. And mine was waiting on the screen of the laptop in my hands. I opened it slowly, the hum of the machine, a private drumbeat against the roar of applause. On the desktop sat the file, Receipts, Presentation, Final. Inside were the record's metadata showing my name as the author, Ivy's journal. Entries photographed, page-by-page audio recordings of dinner table confessions. Even the video of Vivian herself declaring legacy needed a face, and it isn't you. I glanced toward the technician's booth where the projection system waited for a new input. My USB drive was already loaded into my laptop. All I had to do was connect. Vivian gestured toward the screen, her white dress glowing as she basked in the spotlight. The blueprint behind her looked monumental, permanent. The audience leaned forward again, eager for her next word. I stepped closer to the wings, laptop open cable in hand. My chest rose and fell with steady breaths, each one louder in my own ears than the clapping outside. I thought of the dinners where I'd been silenced, the contracts slid across tables, the family chronicles with my image cropped out. I thought of every note I'd typed, receipts, number 1 or 2, or 3. And now this. The applause thundered again. Vivian tilted her chin, radiant certain. I pressed connect. The screen behind her flickered. For a heartbeat, confusion rippled through the crowd. Then the blueprint reappeared, but not the one she'd chosen. This version bore the original corner. Author Ella Whitmore. Gasps cut through the ballroom like shattering glass. A murmur spread across the rows. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence. Cameras zoomed in, recording not just Vivian's face, but the sudden crack in her composure. She turned, saw the screen, and her smile faltered for the first time that evening. I stood in the shadows, my laptop glowing in my hands, heart hammering but steady. The evidence wasn't shouted. It didn't need my voice. It spoke in ink and data, in receipts layered one after another until denial was impossible. The applause had stopped. In its place, silence grew heavy, electric, undeniable. Vivian looked back at the crowd, desperate for recovery, but the spell had broken. The audience no longer saw a visionary. They saw a thief caught mid-performance. I exhaled slowly, the weight on my chest finally loosening. This wasn't just vindication. It was history being corrected in real time in front of every eye that had once applauded my erasure. Behind the curtain, I whispered the words only I could hear, receipts. The lights flickered once, almost imperceptibly, and then the slide jolted as if the projector itself had decided it was tired of lying. For a heartbeat, Vivian's polished blueprint, her version, her name froze on the giant screen. The crowd sat still, eyes lifted, pens, poised cameras steady. And then in one swift flicker, the image changed. The original blueprint appeared, the one with my name. In the corner, printed cleanly in black ink as it had been from the very first draft, E. Whitmore. A ripple tore through the ballroom. Gasps fluttered like wings. For a moment, no one clapped. No one whispered. No one moved. They just stared at the screen, the spell broken. Vivian, frozen at the podium in her glowing white dress, turned to look, her body stiffening as if the fabric itself had betrayed her. And then, as if the blueprint alone wasn't enough, the screen split again. A new window opened, metadata cascading in stark white letters against the black. Created by Ella Whitmore. Date original draft. 11:42 p.m. Edits multiple. Author unchanged. The room erupted. Chairs scraped the floor as reporters leaned forward, their pens flying. Phones shot into the air, recording streaming. Flashbulbs burst in rapid fire, strobing across Vivian's face until she looked less like a star and more like a criminal caught in headlights. The investors who had toasted her name only minutes before whispered furiously among themselves, their smiles slipping into suspicion. The sound was deafening shutters, clicking cameras, flashing murmurs, rising into full-blown voices. Did you see that her name's not Vivian? It says Ella. Vivian's hands trembled against the podium. She opened her mouth, closed it again, tried to laugh. This is some sort of technical issue? She stammered, but her voice was thin, unraveling under the glare of the truth projected 20 feet tall. Behind the curtain, I stood with my laptop, the master file glowing in my hands. I had timed it, prepared it, rehearsed it in my mind 100 times. But nothing compared to watching it unfold live, watching the years of erasure crumble in seconds. I whispered to myself, steady receipts. The file spoke louder than I ever could. It didn't plead. It didn't argue. It simply showed. And the truth once shown could not be unseen. The ballroom was chaos now. Investors demanded answers, their voices sharp. Reporters shouted Vivian's name, their cameras flashing faster as though the frenzy itself could expose more. Vivian, did you forge the design? Who is Ella Whitmore? Why wasn't the author credited? She looked small, then still dazzling in her white dress, but shrinking beneath the weight of eyes and evidence. Her glow wasn't enough to outshine data. No curated smile could blur a metadata trail. I tightened my grip on the laptop. The master file pulsed on my screen, undeniable, irreversible. For so long, my family's narrative had tried to paint me out, cropped photos, missing credits, silenced dinners. Tonight, the cropping stopped. For the first time, the truth wasn't hidden in a folder, a notebook, or a private recording. It was center stage, 10 feet tall, flashing under the blinding light of cameras. The applause was gone. In its place, the crackle of scandal. The hum of history shifting. Vivian's voice tried again, sharper now. Desperate. This is sabotage. She's trying to ruin me. But her words dissolved under the roar of the crowd, drowned by the storm she had created. I stood in the shadows, invisible to the audience, but no longer erased. My name was on the wall, projected above her, etched into the record. Created by Ella Whitmore. 3 words. Enough to rewrite everything. The flashes burned, the voices rose, but I felt calm, steady. For the first time, I wasn't holding the truth in secret. I had released it, let it stand for itself. And the truth, once set free, doesn't go back into silence. The master file had spoken. The ballroom was chaos, cameras flashing like lightning storms, voices rising into a tide of disbelief. On the giant screen, my name glowed where it had always belonged. Created by Ella Whitmore. Vivian stood frozen at the podium, her white dress gleaming under the glare of evidence she could no longer control. And then came the sound that had always cut deepest, the sound of my father's voice. Turn it off. Richard Whitmore's command cracked through the room like a whip. He pushed back his chair so violently it scraped against the polished floor, standing tall at the head of the investors' table. His face was crimson. His jaw clenched, his fist tight around the stem of his wine glass. The man who had spent his life controlling every room, every narrative, now barked orders as if volume could erase truth. But this time, Volume wasn't enough. From the side of the stage, a new presence emerged. Calm, deliberate, unshaken. Mr. Grayson, the estate lawyer, stepped into the light. His charcoal suit looked almost austere against the chaos, his silver hair catching the glow of the projector. In his hands was the same leather folder he had opened quietly at the family table, its clasp snapping open with the weight of inevitability. His voice when it came was clear, steady, and carried farther than Richard's roar. "This file is legally authenticated," he said, holding a document high enough for the cameras to catch. "Any alteration without Ella Whitmore's consent is unauthorized." The room stilled. The shouting ebbed into murmurs, the investors leaning forward, reporters scribbling furiously, microphones extended to catch every word. Vivian's composure cracked entirely. Her hands gripped the podium as if it could anchor her, her eyes darting between her father and the lawyer who had just stripped her mask away. Richard glared, fury blazing, but for the first time I saw uncertainty flicker in his expression. He had built his empire on toasts and declarations, on power that bent perception. But Grayson's words weren't performance, they were law. And law didn't yield to applause or anger. "This is outrageous," Richard snapped, slamming his glass down so hard the stem cracked. "This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. It concerns the truth." Mr. Grayson cut in his tone, sharp enough to slice the air. He turned slightly toward the audience, his voice rising with authority. "The record is clear. The author of this design is Ella Whitmore. Any claim to the contrary is fraudulent, and any attempt to exploit that fraud is subject to legal consequence." The flash of cameras surged again, feeding on the electricity of the moment. I watched as the investors' expressions shifted confusion to shock, shock to anger, anger to calculation. The room that had cheered Vivian minutes ago now looked at her with suspicion. My father's hands shook as he tried to reclaim control, but each word from Mr. Grayson dragged him further from the center. Clara, my mother, sat pale and quiet, her usual smile gone. Henry muttered something about keeping it in the family, but no one listened. The narrative had shattered, and the pieces were no longer theirs to gather. I stayed behind the curtain laptop, still warm in my arms, breath steady. For years, they had cropped me out, silenced me, painted me as ungrateful. But here, in front of cameras and strangers and their own curated audience, the truth had been spoken aloud and stamped with authority. The evidence was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the record, to the law, to every person who had seen and heard it. Vivian tried one last time, her voice trembling. This was collaboration. We built it together. But the words fell flat. The screen behind her glowed with metadata, and Grayson's folder remained open, its papers like blades. The verdict had already been given. For once, Richard's booming voice was powerless. He could rage, he could command, he could spit accusations, but he couldn't scrub my name from the screen. Not anymore. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the moment wash over me. This wasn't triumph in the form of applause. It wasn't vindication in the form of cheers. It was something quieter, deeper, the silence that follows when lies finally collapse and truth stands unshaken. The Whitmore legacy had been rewritten not by toasts, not by captions, but by receipts law and an unflinching voice that refused to bend. The ballroom had become a courtroom, not by design, but by consequence. The screen still glowed with the evidence, the original blueprint, my name etched in the corner, metadata projected in letters too large to deny. Mr. Grayson's voice still lingered in the air like the echo of a gavel. "Any alteration without Ella's consent is unauthorized." But Vivian, dressed in her immaculate white gown, refused to fall silently. She clutched the podium as though it were a lifeline, her knuckles pale against the polished wood. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing every angle of her unraveling. She forced a smile, brittle and trembling. It was a joint effort, she said, her tone pitched too high. "We built this together as a family." The words fluttered into the air, weak, already crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Yet she pressed on, desperate. "Every project is collaborative." Ella helped, of course she did, but the vision. And then came the interruption that no one expected. A voice, quiet but unwavering, broke through the crowd. "That's not true." All heads turned. From the third row, half hidden until now, Ivy rose to her feet. The cousin no one ever counted. The girl, always pushed to the corner of photographs, asked to fetch napkins dismissed as invisible. She clutched something in her hands, a small pink notebook, edges bent, cover worn soft with use. Vivian froze. Ivy stepped forward, her steps hesitant but steady until she reached the edge of the stage. She lifted the notebook high, her voice stronger now. I wrote every call she made to cut Ella out. Here are the dates. The air cracked open. Gasps rippled through the audience. Investors leaned forward. Reporters surged closer, flashes blinding as they snapped shot after shot of the pink journal held high like a relic. On stage, Vivian's posture stiffened. Her smile broke entirely, her face a mask of panic. Ivy opened the notebook, flipping through pages filled with her careful handwriting. February 12th. Vivian called the seamstress, demanded the credit box be changed. She turned a page, her voice steady, echoing now through microphones and cameras. March 3rd. Vivian told the design firm to remove Ella's initials before the press release. Another page. April 9th. Vivian rehearsed speeches she copied word for word from Ella's drafts. Each line was a hammer, each page a blow. The audience's eyes shifted as one no longer on the screen or the lawyer, but on Vivian. They studied her not as a star, but as a defendant. Her shoulders hunched, her breath shallow, her polished facade cracking with every syllable Ivy read aloud. Stop. Vivian hissed, her voice cracking, but it was too late. The words weren't hers to control anymore. They belonged to the record, and the record had been set free. Ivy snapped the notebook shut and held it against her chest. Her eyes locked on me for the first time. A silent message passed between us. You're not alone. I saw. I kept the proof. The ballroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, investors demanded explanations. The hum of scandal louder than any applause had ever been. Cameras flashed faster, capturing Vivian not in triumph but in collapse. Her gown, her smile, her carefully curated glow, all reduced to a hollow costume under the weight of receipts. Richard's face darkened. He looked from Vivian to the audience, then to me, but even his voice, once booming enough to silence rooms, faltered. The verdict had already been delivered, not by his decree, but by evidence layered so thick no performance could erase it. Vivian's collapse was not dramatic. No tears, no fainting. It was worse than that. It was the stillness of someone who realizes the performance is over and the audience knows the script was forged. I exhaled steady. My folder of receipts had grown piece by piece metadata recordings notes. But it was Ivy's pink notebook, unexpected and undeniable, that struck the final blow. Receipts NAR 4, handwritten and unstoppable. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not just by the crowd, not just by the law, but by the quiet cousin who had been watching all along. The Whitmore legacy had collapsed not with applause or toasts, but with ink on paper, a notebook lifted high, and the truth spoken without fear. The ballroom was still humming with the aftershock of Ivy's revelation. Her pink notebook had cracked the performance wide open, and Vivian's collapse still hung heavy in the air. Cameras flashed, voices clashed, and for a moment it felt like the entire room was spinning without gravity. And then the microphone found its way to me. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't planned some grand speech. But as the host, trembling from the chaos, extended the mic in my direction, the weight of silence pressed down. Every eye turned, every camera lens narrowed. For the first time in years, the stage wasn't Vivian's. It was mine. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal, steadying my breath. The noise dimmed until all that remained was the faint hum of the speakers and the sound of my own heartbeat. This isn't revenge. I began, my voice quiet, but carrying clear enough to slice through the tension. It's authorship. The words hung unfamiliar to a crowd that had only ever been fed Vivian's polished narratives. I let the pause linger long enough for the cameras to catch the steadiness in my face, long enough for my family to feel the weight of what came next. You tried to crop me out? I continued, my eyes sweeping across the audience over the investors, the journalists, the relatives who had pretended not to see. My gaze landed briefly on Richard, who sat rigid, his glass untouched. Then on Clara, her hands folded tight in her lap. Then, finally, on Vivian, standing in her white dress, a star dimmed her chest, rising and falling too quickly. But I kept the receipts. I lifted my phone, its screen glowing faintly files and folders, neatly stacked screenshots, recordings, journals, the master file. Proof gathered not out of spite, but out of survival. And receipts outlast lies. The words landed with a finality even I hadn't expected. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Dead still. I thought maybe no one would clap, that maybe evidence was too cold, too sharp to earn applause. And then it came. A single pair of hands first, then another, then a wave that built until the ballroom shook with it. Applause. Not for Vivian. Not for the legacy they had tried to force-feed the world. But for me. For the truth. The sound rolled across the room like thunder, drowning out Vivian's protests, drowning out Richard's scowl, drowning out years of silence. The flashes now pointed at me. The microphones leaned my way. My name, Ella Whitmore, was no longer buried in metadata or scribbled in the corner of blueprints. It was alive, spoken, documented, undeniable. Vivian stood frozen, her mouth parted as if she wanted to object, but the noise swallowed her whole. She had been the face, but faces crack. Receipts don't. I lowered the mic slowly, the echo of my words still hanging in the chandelier-lit air. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. Not because I'd won some victory over my sister, but because the record was intact. Because I existed in the narrative again, not as a shadow, but as the author. This wasn't triumph in the Hollywood sense. It wasn't a swelling orchestra or a cinematic embrace. It was something smaller, sharper, and more permanent. It was credit restored. And in families like mine, that was everything. I stepped back, handing the mic off. The applause followed me, carrying me like a tide. For once, I didn't need to smile or explain or soften myself to make others comfortable. For once, the truth was enough. I glanced toward Ivy, who clutched her pink notebook to her chest, her face glowing with a quiet pride no one could erase. She had given me the opening. Mr. Grayson had given me the legal anchor. But this was my voice reclaiming what they had tried to bury. Not revenge. Authorship. And as the applause thundered on, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: receipts don't need an audience to matter. But when they finally find one, they echo louder than lies ever could. Ever had to take credit back with proof. 1 sour yes, 0 no. That night, long after the last cameras had packed up and the last champagne flute was cleared away from the ballroom, I found myself back in my studio. The city outside was quiet rain pattering against the windows, streaking the glass in silver threads. The chaos of the reveal still echoed faintly in my bones. The flashes, the applause, Vivian's collapse, but here in the solitude of 4 walls, the noise softened into something almost sacred. I set the tube gently on my drafting table and unrolled it with careful hands. The paper gave a faint crackle, stiff from years of handling edges, worn corners, creased. The original blueprint. My blueprint. Its lines still carried the midnight hours I had poured into them, the stubborn ink of my name in the bottom corner, E. Whitmore. The document that had outlasted every crop, every edit, every attempt to erase. Beside it, I laid out something older, more fragile, a folded letter, its paper yellowed, its edges softened with time. The handwriting looped in careful strokes, steady and feminine. My grandmother's voice lived in those lines long after her passing. You have nothing to prove to those who want you small. I read it again aloud this time, my voice breaking slightly in the stillness. Her words had been written years ago, tucked into a birthday card when I was just beginning architecture school. I hadn't understood then the depth of what she meant. Now I did. Because tonight had proven the opposite of what my family had always preached. Legacy wasn't in toasts raised by men with booming voices. It wasn't in family chronicles printed to perfection or Instagram stories bathed in filters. Legacy wasn't what they cropped or staged or forced into glossy pages. Legacy was what you preserved. I reached for the frame leaning against the wall, a simple black border matte finish. Slowly, I placed the blueprint inside, smoothing it flat. Then with reverence, I slipped the letter into the corner, overlapping just enough so her words anchored my name. proof and wisdom side by side, the record and the reason. When I hung the frame on the wall above my desk, the rain outside quickened to percussion to mark the moment. I stepped back, staring at the image now fixed in glass. For years, I had been cropped, erased, silenced, told to shrink. And yet here it was, undeniable, my work. My name, my grandmother's reminder that I never had to prove myself to those committed to erasing me. I whispered to the quiet room words meant only for the paper and the rain. Legacy isn't what they print. It's what you preserve. The studio seemed to exhale with me. The drafting table, scarred with pen marks and coffee stains, bore witness. The walls, once bare, now carried a truth that couldn't be undone. Behind me, folders stacked neatly, metadata files, screenshots, audio recordings. Ivy's journal pages, all the receipts that had carried me through silence. They were important, yes. But tonight wasn't about the archive. Tonight was about something quieter, stronger. Tonight was about claiming space not in courtrooms or ballrooms, but here in my own sanctuary. The applause from earlier replayed in my memory not because I needed it, but because it reminded me how long I had gone unheard. The difference now wasn't the sound, it was the permanence. Applause fades. Truth framed on a wall does not. I traced the glass with my fingertips, once committing the moment to memory. My grandmother's words, my signature, my survival. The Whitmore name would continue to echo in some circles, attached to Vivian's curated image, to Richard's booming toasts, to Clara's soft deflections. But I had my own echo now, etched into paper, preserved in ink, safeguarded in glass. And unlike their legacy, mine could not be edited. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the city outside to illuminate the frame. The blueprint and the letter glimmered together in the dark like two guardians holding the truth steady. Legacy wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine.